If you've ever recorded a lo-fi guitar part that's technically fine, but just feels cold or lifeless, the problem usually isn't your plugins, it's how the guitar is sitting emotionally in the track. In today's episode, I'll talk about how to make lo-fi guitars feel warm, dreamy and nostalgic without any over-processing.
You're listening to the Lofi Music Academy podcast, your go-to space for all things lo-fi. Sit back, relax, and let's dive into the world of lo-fi music production.
Hi, and welcome to the Lofi Music Academy podcast. I'm Spencer J, your guide through the chilled-out, atmospheric world of lo-fi beats. Lo-fi guitar is one of those things that sounds effortless when you hear it done well, but it's incredibly frustrating when you try and do it yourself. You pick up the guitar, play something simple, you record it clean and think, yeah, this should work. But then you listen back and it feels thin or too present, or really it's just disconnected from the rest of the track. So you start adding lots of plugins, reverb, delay, saturation, some chorus. And somehow, instead of it sounding warmer and dreamier, it just starts sounding more processed. In today's episode, I want to reframe how lo-fi guitar actually works, not as a lead instrument and not as a technical exercise, but as an emotional texture that lives inside the music. Because once you understand the role of the guitar plays in lo-fi music, the technical choices stop feeling confusing. One of the biggest mistakes producers make with lo-fi guitar is treating it like a performance. We come from a mindset where guitar is meant to be heard clearly, where clean tone, confident playing, and strong presence are all good things. And yeah, that's true in most genres, they definitely are. But lo-fi doesn't really want that. In lo-fi, guitar is often more like a memory than a moment. It's not there to impress the listener, it's there to create a feeling that sits quietly in the background of their day. When the guitar becomes too confident, too precise or too forward, it stops feeling nostalgic and starts feeling like it's asking for too much attention. And lo-fi almost never wants attention. Once you accept that your guitar part doesn't need to be the star of the track, it becomes much easier to make it feel warm and dreamy. Before you touch any effects, it's worth paying attention to how the guitar is actually played. Lo-fi guitar benefits from softness, from restraint, from slightly imperfect timing and touch, notes that maybe ring out a little longer than they should, strings that aren't muted perfectly. When you play gently, the guitar naturally wants to sit back in the mix. When you play aggressively or confidently, you're fighting against the actual lo-fi aesthetic before you even start mixing. A lot of warmth comes from how little you ask the instrument to do. And this is why some guitar parts never sound right no matter how many plugins you add to them. The performance itself is already too present. A completely clean guitar recording often feels surprisingly cold in a lo-fi track. Not because it's bad, but because it's emotionally exposed. Digital recordings are very honest, and honesty isn't always what lo-fi is all about. Lo-fi usually benefits from a little distance between the sound and the listener. A sense that the guitar has been softened by time, space, or memory. This is where subtle saturation becomes really important, not as distortion, but as warmth. You're not trying to hear saturation working, you're trying to feel the absence of digital sharpness. If the guitar suddenly feels too clear or too literal, it often means it needs a touch of harmonic blur rather than just more EQ. One thing I see a lot of producers do is building long effects chains and hoping that the vibe appears at the end. Lo-fi guitar tends to work better when you think in terms of space rather than processing. Where does the guitar live? Is it close or far away? Is it meant to feel intimate or distant? Instead of stacking effects, it often helps to separate out the roles, a dry guitar sound that holds the emotional core, and then subtle layers around it that create the depth. When effects are doing too many jobs at once, the guitar starts to feel artificial. When each layer has a single purpose, the sound feels natural and calm. Another way to think about this, imagining a guitar already living inside a room before you've added effects. Not a physical room, an emotional one. Is it meant to feel like it's coming from next door, or from a late night bedroom session, or from a half-remembered recording that's been replayed too many times? When you start with that question, your effects choices become obvious. You're no longer adding reverb because lo-fi guitars use reverb. You're adding it because you're placing the guitar somewhere specific in the listener's world. And this mindset also helps you prevent over-processing. If the guitar already feels like it belongs somewhere emotionally, you'll notice much faster when an effect pulls it out of that space instead of deeper into it. Reverb is one of the most misunderstood tools in lo-fi guitar. The goal usually isn't to make the guitar sound big, it's to make it sound far away. Smaller reverbs often work better than large ones. Plates, rooms and short halls, they tend to feel more nostalgic than massive spaces, especially when they're dark and filtered. High frequencies in reverb pull attention away. Low frequencies create mud, and filtering out both ends help the guitar sit behind the mix instead of floating on top of it. When reverb is working properly, you don't really notice it until you mute it. A useful trick here is to listen to the reverb by itself for a moment. Solo the reverb return, and if it sounds bright, detailed or impressive on its own, it's probably too much for lo-fi guitar. The best lo-fi reverbs are often sound dull or even boring in isolation. That's because their job isn't to be heard, it's to soften the edges and push the guitar slightly away from the listener. Another thing worth experimenting with is pre-delay. Removing or shortening pre-delay can help the reverb blend into the guitar, instead of sitting behind it as a separate layer. This makes the guitar feel older, hazier, and more nostalgic, which is exactly what we want. Delay in lo-fi guitar should feel almost accidental. Short delays, low feedback, and quiet levels tend to work best. You're not trying to create a rhythmic pattern, you're creating a soft echo that adds depth without demanding attention. If the delay starts to feel musical or obvious, it usually means it's doing too much. Often a barely audible mono delay tucked quietly into the mix feels more natural than a wide stereo delay that announces itself. Again, the question is always, does this support the mood or does it pull away focus? Delay can also be used emotionally rather than musically. Instead of syncing it perfectly to the tempo, try letting it drift slightly off grid. Even a small timing mismatch can make the delay feel less mechanical and more human. You're not trying to create repeats that the listener counts. You're creating the sensation that the sound lingers for just a moment longer than expected. This kind of delay works best when you don't really notice it until you mute it. If the track feels suddenly emptier, flatter, or less emotional without it, then it's definitely doing its job. A completely static guitar can feel lifeless in lo-fi. This is where very gentle modulation can help, not to create an effect, but to create instability. Slow chorus, slight vibrato, or subtle pitch movement can make the guitar feel human and imperfect, like it's gently drifting rather than sitting still. The key is be subtle. Lo-fi modulation should feel like wear and tear, not like an obvious effect. If you can clearly hear the modulation working, it's probably too much. What's important with modulation is that it feels inconsistent. Perfect repeating modulation cycles can sound very synthetic. Slower or uneven movements tend to feel more natural, almost like the guitar is gently shifting rather than being modulated. This is why tape-style movement often works really well in lo-fi. It introduces tiny fluctuations that don't repeat exactly the same way every time. When done right, this movement adds life without adding attention. The guitar feels warmer, not because it's louder or brighter, but because it feels less static. Here's something that surprises a lot of producers. You can often fix a lo-fi guitar by doing less. Lower the volume, pan it slightly off centre. Let it sit behind the drums instead of competing with them. Dreamy guitar almost always feels quieter than you think it should be. If you need the guitar loud to feel emotional, it may be doing the wrong job in your track. Listeners don't analyse lo-fi guitar, they absorb it. Placement always changes how listeners emotionally interpret the guitar. A centred loud guitar feels intentional. A slightly panned, quieter guitar feels reflective, and a guitar tucked just behind the drums feels supportive rather than expressive. These choices communicate mood before the listener ever consciously hears a note, and this is why lo-fi guitar often sounds better when you mix it faster and not slower. Overthinking placement usually leads to a creeping forward again. Trusting your first instinct, then turning it down just a little, often leads you closer to the lo-fi feel that you're looking for. There's a moment in lo-fi production where the guitar stops feeling like an instrument that you've just added and starts feeling like part of the atmosphere itself. That usually happens when you stop thinking of it as just a guitar track and start thinking of it as an emotional glue. Something that connects the rhythm, the harmony and the mood without ever asking for any credit. When lo-fi guitar is working, you don't hum it later. You don't remember the exact notes. What you remember is how the track made you feel while it was playing quietly in the background of your life. And that's a good sign. And it's also why chasing perfect tone or clever effects chains often leads producers away from the lo-fi aesthetic. The guitar's job isn't to stand out, it's to dissolve into the track, just enough to soften everything else that's around it. Lo-fi guitar doesn't need to be perfect, it doesn't need to be expressive, it doesn't need to explain itself, it just needs to feel like it belongs. Next time you're working on a guitar part, try doing less than feels comfortable. Turn it down, soften it, and let it sit in the background of your own listening. If it still feels warm and nostalgic, you're closer than you think. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing it with fellow music producers who might find it useful. Until next time, keep creating, stay inspired, and remember, it's all about the vibe. Take care and see you in the next episode.
Thanks for tuning in to the Lofi Music Academy podcast. If you're ready to start making lo-fi music and want to go even deeper, grab your free guide. Discover the 6 essential steps to create a release-ready lo-fi track from scratch. Whether you're using budget gear in your bedroom or a small home studio, this guide will help you get that polished, dreamy lo-fi sound you're after. Just go to www.lofimusicacademy.com. Until next time, keep creating those laid-back vibes, and don't forget to subscribe for more lo-fi tips and tricks.